Welcome to WCS Talks Unplugged, where we bring you real stories, real solutions for the mind and the planet. This podcast is brought to you by Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, a global community elevating women's leadership, accelerating climate solutions, and championing a more equitable, clean economy. Every episode, we sit down with the thinkers, builders, and innovators, redefining what climate leadership looks like and doing it with purpose and heart. So settle in, take a breath, and get ready for an honest, insightful conversation that just might spark your next idea, shift your perspective, or inspire your own climate journey. Let's get unplugged. Hello, and welcome to WCS Talks Unplugged. I'm your host, Farah Saeed, Board Secretary for Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability and Industry Director at Frost & Sullivan. The topic of today's show is something that I'm actually really interested in learning more about, and that is the digital dilemma. So, we often talk about the urgent need for climate technology, solutions that will help decarbonize our world. And there are some pretty neat solutions being worked on related to emission tracking, grid optimization, hyperscale weather forecasting. Of course, the list is very long. But what if our reliance on AI-enabled tools for climate adaptation and climate mitigation requires a closer review? And what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at data centers. Today, data centers account for roughly 2% of the global electricity demand. And in the US, that figure is closer to 4%. By 2030, these percentages are actually expected to double, in part due to AI. And during that period, AI is estimated to account for 44% of data center power usage. But it's not only just electricity, it also affects our water consumption. A large-scale data center can consume up to 5 million gallons per day for server cooling, and that's roughly the same amount used by a city of 50,000 people. So today, we're pulling back the curtain on this digital dilemma, and we'll be in conversation with an industry thought leader who has a very interesting perspective on how to address this. Susannah Hill is the co-founder of Cloud Sustainability Watch and is a leading voice in green digital infrastructure. She is a sustainability consultant who advocates for reducing environmental impact of cloud computing, Gen AI, and data centers. Welcome to the show, Susannah.
Thank you so much for welcoming, Farah. I am happy to be here, and the topic is one that I would talk about forever.
Lovely. So you're in the right place. So to start off with, can you tell us a little bit more about your work and the mission of Cloud Sustainability Watch?
Well, sure. I entered sustainability about 2.5 years ago and met up with a group of other people who were at the intersection of technology and sustainability. And when you look at those two together, you very quickly arrive at data centers and the carbon emissions that are created by our going online and using electricity. Generating electricity is usually done by fossil fuels, and that creates carbon emissions. So we as a group decided that we wanted to make it very, very easy for technologists to discover how they could make changes big and small that would improve the sustainability of their tech stack. And so we created a nonprofit website called Cloud Sustainability Watch. And it's designed to be a very quick access spot where somebody could land and learn very quickly what the key components of green software design and sustainable architecture are, and be able to then find connections to the resources they need all across the web and go there and find out.
Excellent. So, what would you say are your short term and long term goals for your organization?
My goal in entering this very new and difficult to define field of digital sustainability is to build awareness quickly of how the way that we go online and the way that we design our online applications as technologists drives carbon emissions and freshwater consumption, and also impacts on communities next to the new data centers that are having to due to high demand. My goal is to bring down the rate of growth of carbon emissions, power consumption, and water consumption. And the means of doing that is making it easy as possible for technologists and anybody who's interested in the topic to find out ways that they can make a difference. And if you do just one thing after listening to this podcast and nothing else, I would ask that everybody listening go to the people who are working on the technology in your organization and ask, are we measuring our carbon emissions? And sort of see what kind of a conversation that sparks. Because I think everybody who's involved in software and cloud computing and AI is aware of the carbon emissions and the
Hmm.
power consumption. But getting started on how to measure it or how to get visibility into what you can do, it's hard. And frankly, most people are just going as fast as they can to get some good products out into the world.
True. So it is truly a dilemma because you're dealing with wanting to bring a new product out as quickly as possible to actually solve some of the issues that we are experiencing. But at the same time, it's being counteracted with having to rely on cloud computing, which essentially eats up a lot of power and water. So in your experience, what would you say are the biggest aha moments for some of the clients that you work with regards to identifying those hidden costs? You mentioned something about the importance of, first of all, knowing what you're emitting. So, emission measurements, of course, is very essential for that. Have you come across any surprises when you speak to your clients? What are they most surprised about when you kind of start getting into the weeds of doing all of the emission measuring and all of that stuff?
Oh yeah. Yeah, what a terrific question. It's funny. There are a few ahas. First is that the cloud applications that you decide to use as an organization or as a person represent business partnerships. And it's worth taking a look to see if there is alignment between your organizational values in sustainability and how the vendors that you choose to do business with are looking at their sustainability. There's a vast difference across the industry. Lots of software and cloud application vendors have no reporting of the carbon emissions that they create. And many of them don't have so much as a sustainability page or an ESG page on their website. Others were early signatories to some of the international agreements and are leaders in equipment lifecycle management and vendor takebacks. So you can easily make a switch out between different products that you're using or different applications that you're using and vastly improve the impact that you make and the message that you're sending about what's important. And if all decisions on cloud applications and software were made with sustainability equally valued along other criteria, then the market would quickly shift away from companies that are not doing their bit, and it would cause them perhaps to reform. And that's a piece of my mission that you asked me about at the top of the
Sure, of
show.
course. Yeah, absolutely. So you touched upon that there is also various degrees of awareness or accountability, rather, related to measuring your emission impact or your impact, environmental footprint, I guess, right? So, is there any best practices for implementation of holding your vendors, your suppliers accountable for what they're doing? I guess that's what's referred to as rather scope three type of emissions, too, right? In terms of having that oversight or overview of your suppliers or the vendors that you work with. And in this case, when we're talking about cloud applications and we're talking about climate tech, who would you consider to be the suppliers of vendors that a startup company would need to have a conversation with or be aware of as to who they are working with?
It all depends on context. Let me give you an example of two different companies who underwent a digital emissions measurement process. There's widely recognized in my tiny, teeny little industry of like two people is a case study that was put out by MasterCard about some cloud computing emissions measurement work that they did. They did it in concert with a green computing consultant called Green Pixie out of the UK. Cloud Sustainability Watch has a listing of green computing consultants that you could look at, and Green Pixie's up there. And they're not the only ones, but they did a great project with MasterCard. So MasterCard, as you might imagine, very large financial services company, an enormous amount of cloud services that they buy. What that means is that they are operating all of their management of customer data and transactions and marketing and heaven knows what on many, many servers in many, many parts of the world, almost all of them with Amazon, but not exclusively. And they decided that they wanted to understand where they were driving emissions and where they were inefficient. And I'll tell you about what they did, but in the end, what they discovered is that they were able to build a quite remarkable measurement dashboard for the power they were using, everywhere they were using it, bits of hardware, locations, design of applications, how much storage and how long they were keeping it, all sorts of different things. And they identified 800 metric tons of carbon that they could remove within a year just from their use of the cloud, just from the fact that they understood what they were using and where. They also were very pleased to discover that they were able to they planned to cut $28 million per year out of their spending with Amazon. And that was under a plan they called cloud right sizing. In general, they just sort of moved and closed and reduced the size of software and storage. They sort of optimized it. For example, they switched where they could to less hungry semiconductor chips and cut electricity by almost half where they did that. And they reduced how long they store certain types of data from a year down to 90 days, all kinds of painless operational improvements that would never have been visible if they hadn't built this measurement. So that's the scope and scale of a big technology driven company. But if you're just a small company, imagine the example of a small organization that delivers, say, online education. So they have some online content, they run some live video classes. They don't run their own technology. They use Google and they use Notion or they use Miro and they use Zoom. But they can still do a measurement and discover where they're using the most power or where they're spending money where they might not need to, where there are overlaps, just by taking a look at it. So, for instance, they might decide that in their online classes, everybody might turn off their camera, or that some classes might be audio only. They could compress the size of every video file that they store for reuse and review. They can change their website to have a dark background, to not automatically play videos, anything that brings down the amount of data that gets transferred and how much of an impact that they have on the devices that people are using to view their material. And when you asked earlier about what might be a surprise that somebody might find when they do one of these projects, the surprise is how much emissions are from their own laptops and monitors from their work at home setups. How much embodied emissions are represented there, and how much operational emissions are represented there. And equally, that they're responsible, according to the greenhouse gas protocol, for the emissions of the use of their products. And that means the emissions from everybody who visits or takes their classes, from those people's devices and data emissions. And so they need to really think about how they design what they do in order to reduce emissions. And none of those is painful. But they can also do that vendor alignment I talked about, where they might switch from a not sustainable vendor to one that offers an equal product that is very much on the forefront of sustainability.
Well, those are very interesting examples. And so, my question would be, do you see growing awareness around this?
Hmm. I think people in my field owe a lot of thanks to the recent trend in lots of news media to talk about the alarming growth of AI and AI data centers. They do tend to frame the alarm in terms of the big bad data center companies, but I'll take it. I believe that the real driver, of course, of building a data center is the demand. We're all using AI, and our bosses at every single company are saying that we need to deploy AI. And so I think that the driver of AI growth and data center growth is really, of course, demand. So it comes down to the people who are designing the applications and making the business decisions. So, what is happening with the news reports about data centers is that there is beginning to be a growing awareness that this is a topic. I don't think there's much awareness of how everybody plays a part. There was an incident a couple of decades ago when the ecological term carbon footprint began to be reappropriated and misused by BP in order to shift attention onto individual responsibility for carbon emissions, in much the same way that we might see now people asking, "Oh, should I not use ChatGPT?" And it doesn't come down to your individual use. It aligns with your values, how you
Mhm,
may decide to turn off your monitor and your computer
mhm.
every night and make some nice choices there. But in point of fact, you should go right ahead and use ChatGPT to pick an outfit, but don't use it to create videos. Right. But ChatGPT and the usage by people like you and me isn't really the linch point. The point that I made earlier about that if you do only one thing after listening to this podcast, you go back to your organization and ask, are we measuring the carbon emissions of the technology we use? Because that starts a conversation and awareness and how we can make a change. And with AI coming on, it does vastly amplify the impact of every action. And so the faster awareness gets built, the better. So thank you very, very much for inviting me onto this podcast.
I'm glad.
If you are listening to WCS Talks Unplugged, you are already a part of the conversation. Now it's time to be a part of the community. Join Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability and connect with a global network of women and allies building climate solutions together. Become a member at womeninCleantechSustainability.org.
Susanna, you highlighted some of the main hidden costs associated with power, water, and carbon emission. What do you think is the reason for why climate tech companies themselves are often failing to integrate environmental factors into their own cloud computing strategy? What is their biggest blind spot that they have?
Climate tech is full of startups. And I worked for a startup. Many of us have. The rush to get to market is very, very high pressure. And what I believe is that trying to get something to work based on the way you know how to make it work is the best path to go. It's the fastest. Integrating something new can slow you down. And so, what I'm finding the people among my colleagues is that when we have a live presentation at a conference about this topic, we get a lot of attendees from tech and not so many from sustainability and climate. And I think the reason is that clean tech is trying to get to market. In addition, there's a lot of focus on the climate benefit of the product that they're delivering. And so having to go back and make sure that the way they're delivering it on the cloud is not harmful is a bit of an extra task. And I have every sympathy for that. I think as clean tech matures, two things will happen. One, they'll start to see that there's a competitive advantage in being the people who have a measurement of how much carbon they're emitting, for instance. If their customers need reporting on carbon emissions to comply with regulations, the players who already have that set up are going to be ahead. Second, as cloud companies in general become more mature, they face very large costs in operating their servers in the cloud. And we'll be looking for ways to reduce that cost. And resource conservation is the top way to do that. Consuming less power is the best way to not get charged for storage in the data center. And sustainability is the way to do that. Yeah, there's lots of green tools for measurement. Code Carbon from Sasha Lucioni of Hugging Face and several other people. It's a great bit of code that you can insert in order to start tracking and measuring power consumption and carbon emissions. So that's just one of many.
I think coming back to the earlier topic It all starts with being able to even measure. You need to be aware of what your environmental footprint is. And you gave that very fantastic example of MasterCard, but are there any tools, particular tools that come to mind that our audience should look up? Of course, I would recommend that they go to your website.
So our nonprofit website it's not a business, it's just an information resource. It's called Cloud Sustainability Watch. It's at cloud.sustainability.watch, or if you prefer, cloudsustainability.com. And we also have .org. So we try to be discoverable. The idea is when you go there, you'll find 4 or 5 different things you might find useful. I recommend, if you're not a technologist, go right to our downloads and download our guide to the digital emissions checklist. So that is designed to explain all the different ways that digital emissions in one individual's life can be generated and what you might look at in order to use it. It describes digital emissions, what causes them, and the different ways in your individual life you might be driving them, and what you might look at as a means to address it. It is personal choice. There is certainly reducing the amount of storage and duplicate storage that you use on the cloud. There are applications that you can use to remove duplicate photos on your phone automatically without having to do all the hassle yourself. And there are lots of suggestions there in the digital emissions checklist. There's also the Tech Professional's Guide to Green Computing. That is a download from Cloud Sustainability Watch that describes more in-depth programs that might work. But in terms of tools, on Cloud Sustainability Watch, we have a directory of the mostly open source software tools that can be installed in servers or in software to measure carbon, to measure power use, to track the power use of a chip, all kinds of different available types of tools. You can also go to GitHub. They have an entire green software section. Have a look there. And if you are a technologist, you're probably aware of the Green Software Foundation. And they also have a tremendous number of publications that are very educational about that. But on a personal note, I'm one of the authors of the recently updated Web Sustainability Guidelines that are put out by the World Wide Web Consortium. And those guidelines are very useful for web developers in particular to be able to understand everything from green hosting to minimizing excess code to user design that is more sustainable. It's pretty thorough. And those are the different places I might send people.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure our audience are going to deeply appreciate that. Finally, today's podcast was meant to highlight one of our main goals for women in clean tech and sustainability, and that is to showcase women as industry thought leaders in this sector. Our other goals, of course, include achieving gender parity, building a diverse network, and engaging with our local communities in sustainable actions. As a member of our growing organization, can you share how women in clean tech and sustainability has impacted you?
Yeah, I really love WCS. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area and it's very active here. And I'm still pretty early in my sustainability consulting practice. And I spent a good year trying to sort out exactly where in digital sustainability my spot would be. And I spoke with other WCS members and attended WCS Talks, which was a wonderful event, and felt inspired to be bold and to keep working to work individually and become a consultant in this field. And it was helpful to talk to women who were committed to sustainability and clean tech, even if they really were not in the area of that broad field that I was in, because it was always encouraging, positive, fun conversations with funny people who were so impressive, but so low key about it. And I found that the community and the encouragement were and are invaluable.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's very encouraging to hear that and really appreciate your viewpoint.
I just am a big fan and a longtime member of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. And it's podcasts like this that really prove the value of the organization, I think. allowing all of us to talk about these topics that we're so passionate about. And for me, it's green computing and green software design and green web design, and what we can do in order to make those terms less unknown and more widely used.
Thank you so much for your time today. That's it for today's episode of WCS Talks Unplugged, where we share real stories, real solutions for the mind and the planet. A huge thank you to our guest for joining us and for the work she is doing to move the clean economy forward. And thank you for listening, for showing up with curiosity, hope, and a desire to make a difference. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone in your network who cares about climate, justice, innovation, or building a more sustainable world. This podcast is brought to you by Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, a global community supporting the next generation of climate leaders. To learn more, become a member, or get involved, visit womencleantechsustainability.org. Until next time, this is WCS Talks Unplugged. Stay inspired, stay engaged, and as always, stay unplugged.